Okay. Well, it's about 5:02, so I think we're gonna get this show on the road. So I just wanted to welcome everybody today to our webinar. Today's webinar is called The Science of Reading, Your Questions Answered. Um, Again, if you're just joining us, um, welcome, and please say hello in the chat and add your grade band and your location. It'll be helpful to Emily when she's answering your questions. So I'm Jocelyn Edwards. I'm the marketing manager at Rosen Publishing Group, and I'll be your moderator today. Our presenter is Emily Nudds. Emily is a literacy coach and certified to provide ongoing professional development in the science of reading. She's looked at the questions you submitted when you registered, and she's prepared to answer them, as well as any that may come up today. So before we get started, let's just cover some quick housekeeping items. Everyone is muted while Emily is presenting, but if you have any questions about what you see or hear, you can ask them by using the Q&A window and the now chat box that I have opened up. Thank you for your help. Um, and then uh, you can do that at any time during the presentation. And at the end of each section, we'll stop and we'll answer a few questions that came up during that part. And then if you have a question at that time, just raise your hand and I'll unmute you. And if time allows, at the end of the webinar, I'll open the floor for more questions. If we run out of time and cannot answer all the questions live, then we will get in touch with you and provide you with the answers. So now, without further ado, please welcome Emily Nudds.
Hey everybody, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. Based on all of the locations that you're joining us from, for some of you it's becoming evening, some of you are still afternoon. So I'm happy to have you here. It sounds like many of you are already out of school. We're not over here yet, but that's okay. We're all at a point now, I think, where we can kind of digest the school year that we finished and we're getting ready to maybe not think about next year just yet. We want to enjoy our summers first, right? But I love this topic, the science of reading in general, but more specifically, I love that we get a chance today to talk about your questions and answer some of those ongoing questions that people have. As you all know, we've been inundated, we as teachers have been inundated with emails and professional developments and webinars and podcasts and vlogs and blogs, all surrounding the science of reading, which has been awesome. But when it's time to make some moves in our classrooms, we still have some questions that need to be answered. So I really appreciate all of the questions that you shared when you registered for this webinar. And what we did was we took those questions, we looked for some trends within them and grouped them into some different topics that we'll go through today. But if you included a question and you don't feel like it was answered sufficiently, as Jocelyn said, feel free to raise your hand. You could either type it into the chat box, or Jocelyn will call on you. She can stop me at any time and I can answer some questions. And if there are any questions that come up that I don't know the answer to, I will be very forthright with you and tell you that. But I'm always somebody who's going to try and search for that answer for you. So let's get started. Maybe I can. There we go. Okay, so this is me and this is my school. I am a teacher and a literacy coach at Crane Elementary, which is in Rush Henrietta. Rush Henrietta is a suburban school district just outside of Rochester, New York. So I'm over in that western side of New York. As I said, school is still in session for us. We actually go until the 26th this year. They might as well just put us into July at this point. That's what it sort of feels like. We're all starting to sweat. Everybody's in allergy season, but somehow we're making it through. But this is my school. I've been here for quite a long time. I taught in the classroom for a number of years. As a third and fourth grade teacher, I also taught first and second grade for a little bit. That was for about the first 10 years of my career. And then for the past 9, I've been a literacy coach in my district, where I've really worked with them to start moving from a balanced literacy framework over time. And we are moving into that structured literacy framework that more aligns with the science of reading. All right, so here's like the main question that everybody has. We've all been learning about the science of reading, but where in the world do I begin? So when you're trying to digest all of the information that you have taken in about the science of reading, because as we know, it's this huge body of research that helps us understand how the brain learns to read and all of the processes that readers are going through as they're reading. As you're digesting that, it's really important to keep in mind that you need to work through things in bite-sized, manageable chunks, or else you'll get overwhelmed and probably should put it all to the side. So, when you're trying to think about where you want to begin, first and foremost, you got to keep that brain in mind. So, we know through functional MRIs and all of the research that is out there that reading happens in that left hand language side of the brain. And that while we are reading, our brain is connecting the individual sounds in spoken language to the printed symbols that are on the page. And there are synapses that are firing back and forth constantly, connecting those sounds and those symbols. We have to keep that in mind that we need our readers to be able to go through those processes in their brains and do it at a speed that becomes automatic so that they can access that language comprehension and actually understand what it is that they're decoding. So we want to make sure to keep the brain in mind when we're planning our lessons and when we're thinking about the instruction that we're providing for our students. You also want to keep in mind the major models that are included in the science of reading, and there are a number of them, but a couple that I rely on heavily or the simple view of reading, which tells us that reading comprehension is the product of two factors, word recognition and language comprehension. So when I'm thinking about a reader that's in front of me and they are reading and they're not comprehending what they're reading, I'm reminded by this model that there could be a breakdown in language comprehension, or there could be a breakdown in word recognition, or there could be a breakdown in both. And we know from this model that both word recognition and language comprehension skills have to be so incredibly strong. They have to be solid so that reading comprehension can occur. So this model just reminds me that there's more to reading. And if there is a breakdown in reading comprehension, I shouldn't just keep having my students practice reading comprehension or just teach them reading comprehension. I have to figure out where that breakdown is happening. And I can use Scarborough's rope as a model that can help me start to think about why that breakdown is happening or where the breakdown is happening. So if I have a student that is struggling with word recognition, then I really need to think about the different strands that go into word recognition. So I'm going to ask myself some questions. Is there phonological awareness in place? And more specifically, phonemic awareness. So phonological awareness is that umbrella term that means that we can recognize that words are broken down into smaller parts. Phonemic awareness means that we are able to perceive those individual speech sounds within words. So I want to make sure that I'm checking to see if my reader has those phonemic skills in place. I want to know if they can decode. So can they take those phonemic skills, connect it to a letter symbol, and get those words off the page? And can they do it quick enough and automatic enough so that it's sight recognition? And when we use that term sight recognition, we're talking about any of the words that a reader can read as if by sight. And I say as if by sight because Keith Rayner's eye movement research shows us that really strong readers actually do perceive every single letter in the word that they are reading. They're just doing it at a rate that is so fast, it is as if by sight. So if I have a student who's struggling in word recognition, I'm going to tease out those strands. Similarly, if a student is struggling with their language comprehension, meaning they can listen to a text, but they really can't understand what's being taught, I'm going to look a little bit more into their background knowledge. So, do they have any kind of background knowledge on the topic that they're reading about? How is their vocabulary? Do they understand those most important vocabulary words within the text that are going to help them get to the meaning of the text? Do they have an understanding of language structures and syntax and grammar? Do they have those verbal reasoning skills? Are they able to infer? Can they tell how a character is feeling? And of course, do they have literacy knowledge? Do they understand about the particular genre that they're learning about? So this model, when I'm thinking about the science of reading and where to start, this model is really helpful. Again, if I'm trying to help a struggling reader to pinpoint where that breakdown is occurring. But I can also use it to audit my day or my week. I want to make sure as a classroom teacher that I am hitting all of these skills when I'm teaching my students. So when I look at my lesson plans throughout the week, I can kind of take note and make sure that I can tally it up and that I've explicitly taught all of these areas. So this model is helpful for that as well. We want to make sure that when we're getting started with aligning our practices with the science of reading, we are following a structured literacy approach. And the structured literacy approach is explicit. We are coming right out and we are telling our students what it is that we want them to learn. We're not leaving it up to chance. So if we want to teach students that CH says ch, we're not just going to give them a text that has a bunch of CH words in it and hope that they pick it up. We're going to be explicit with that. We want to make sure that we are systematic. So we're following the same kind of steps in order to teach our students what it is that we want them to learn. We want to make sure that we're following a sequence, that our lessons are going in a sequential order and that they're cumulative so that they build on one another and that review is built in as they're learning a new skill. They're reviewing and practicing previously learned skills. And it's really important to keep in mind that this structured literacy approach is used in all components of literacy, not just phonics. I know that there are so many messages out there that the science of reading equates to phonics instruction, and that is not true. I know here in New York, there's been a message that science of reading is just going back to basics, going back to phonics, and is that a component of it? Absolutely, it is a super important component of it. But when we're thinking about the science of reading, we're really talking about those structured lessons in all areas that are involved with reading. So our foundational skills, language comprehension, reading comprehension, and of course, writing as well. Jocelyn, please stop me at any time if there are questions that pop up. When you are creating your lesson plans following a structured literacy approach, you want to make sure that you're using a very explicit phonics lesson plan template. And there are many out there, and if they are aligned with the brain research, then they're all going to be pretty similar. So even if your school is using a particular purchased program, you can use this lesson plan template to help you plan for your phonics lessons if the product that your school uses is not already aligned to the science of reading. So an explicit phonics lesson plan is going to start with that phonological and phonemic awareness warm-up. We want to make sure our readers' brains are primed and that they are tuning into the individual sounds in spoken language, so that when we get to the phonics piece, we can layer on those letters that match those sounds. You want to make sure that you're reviewing the previous lesson. As I said before, you want to be reviewing while teaching a new skill. When you move on to introducing the new concept, you're going to want to follow an I do, we do, you do approach. So you are going to come right out and model, teach and model for your students the skill that you want them to learn. Then you're going to practice it together where you are modeling the skill and they are also practicing the skill right along with you. And then followed by some extended practice where they're practicing it on their own and you're giving them that immediate corrective feedback. And this can be done in both a whole group setting. It can also be done in a small group setting. So if you're introducing a skill for the first time, let's say in first grade, you absolutely can be doing this whole group. And then when you're noticing that there are some students that need a little bit of extra extended practice, that's when you're going to pull them aside to your kidney table and you're going to give them some of that individual extended practice with you. You want to make sure that your lesson includes some dictation practice so that kids are practicing both decoding and encoding. Because when we keep the reading brain in mind, we remember that we need to be connecting the phonology and the orthography over and over and over again to build that really strong bridge so that our readers are storing these words into that visual word form area, that brain's letterbox, so that they can automatically pull them out and retrieve them for both decoding and encoding. It's super important to connect to word meaning because we want to always be building our students' vocabulary in all kinds of words, tiered 1, 2, and 3 vocabulary words. And then it's so important that we allow our students the time to apply their skills in connected text. And that's an area that is often overlooked, usually due to time, because it will come at the end of a skills lesson. But we have to make sure that our students are taking those individual skills that we've taught them in our phonics lesson and giving them that time to apply it in connected text, for both, again, decoding in the decodable text and also encoding through dictation.
Emily,
Yeah,
sorry, a question came in. Do
great.
you I need some resources for a decodable recommendations for a decodable book series. Do you
Yeah.
have recommendations?
Do I have recommendations? Well, I sure do. We, we actually just in the fall released a decodable text series through Rosen and Norwood House, which is an imprint of Rosen Publishing. So we worked on a scope and sequence that is aligned with the science of reading. It's a very common scope and sequence, although there's no single scope and sequence that's agreed upon on all reading experts. There are some similarities with many of these scopes and sequences. So our decodable text series called The Decodables, pretty easy to remember, was just released in the fall, and we're actually working on an extension of that for our 2nd through 4th graders. So we can definitely give you a link to that at the end of the presentation.
Yes, I will. I'll put up a link and a QR code on where to go to get that series at the end of the
Perfect.
presentation. Yep,
Thanks, Jocelyn.
you're welcome.
All right. So again, as you're thinking about getting started with your science of reading and putting it all into practice, you want to make sure that you're using assessment to form your small groups. And I know as teachers, assessment has kind of gotten a bad rap throughout the years, and I imagine it's because we assess our students so much. So you want to make sure you're using the right assessments that are going to give you some information that you can use right away. So when you're thinking about forming your small groups, you want to be using assessments starting with your universal screener. So many schools have a universal screener that they use with all of their students that will flag those students that are considered at risk of reading failure. So you're going to start there, right? You're going to use that universal screener that is given to all, and then you're going to take a peek at the students who are flagged as at risk. And from there, you're going to then administer some diagnostics. So you want to figure out what's going on here. Why are they considered at risk? So from there, you're going to use an assessment like a phonemic awareness screener or a diagnostic. You want to check to make sure that they are able to perceive those individual speech sounds within spoken words. You might give them a phonics and word reading survey to see how they are able to read individual words. A phonics and word reading survey will also tell you where the breakdown is happening. So maybe you have a student who's really solid in reading CBC words, but as soon as it gets to blends, that's when they fall apart. That shows you that that's where your instruction in small group is going to begin. Um, you are also going to want to make sure to give a spelling inventory. Spelling inventories are so great because they are really a window into that visual word form area of a reader's brain. So when you are analyzing student spelling, you can not only see which spelling patterns or phonics patterns that they have solid, because if they can spell them accurately, they can most likely read them accurately. But it's also going to help you check phonology, because oftentimes you'll have students who, when they're spelling, you're going to start to notice that they are not perceiving certain sounds within words. You'll, again, going back to those blends, a lot of times when you see students spelling fall apart, oftentimes it's because they're not perceiving that second sound in a blend. So in the word play, for example, they might spell it with a P and then an A or even a PAY, but not include that L if they're not hearing or perceiving that O sound after P. So spelling inventories are awesome. They really do give you a window into what is solid with your readers and your writers. And you can also just take a normal writing sample. If you didn't want to do a spelling inventory or a spelling test, you could just take everyday writing and really analyze that to again check for that phonology, see if there are sounds that are missing, and then analyze the spelling patterns that they should have been taught and have remembered up to this point. And you're going to use all of that information to form your small groups and to pinpoint where your first lesson is going to be. And then, of course, you're going to reassess along the way and keep those groups fluid. You might have a group that's working on some phonemic awareness stuff for just a couple of weeks, and then they can start to move into other things. So you want to make sure that you have created a schedule and created a grouping system that is a little bit more fluid and not as rigid as maybe we have been in the past. Okay. Are there any other questions about where to begin before we move into talking about some strategies?
Yeah, we're gonna open up the floor now. If anybody has a question, feel free to raise your hand. I'll unmute you and you could talk to Emily herself. Anybody? She's doing such a good job that nobody has any questions. See?
It's just late in the day.
Yeah, I think
I
so.
got it, guys.
Um, okay, well, we do have a question here. Um, oh, I guess maybe you answered that. How important are letter formation and handwriting?
Ooh, that is such a good question. That is so important. Um, Letter formation and handwriting is incredibly important for a number of reasons. First of all, we want to make sure that we are spending a significant amount of time in those primary grades teaching proper letter formation for both accuracy and for automaticity. We want to make sure that our students are forming their letters correctly first and foremost, because that is, again, getting back to that visual word form area, that is helping store those letters correctly in the visual word form area. We also want to make sure that they are forming the letters efficiently and automatically, because when it comes time to write a composition piece, kids have to be able to write automatically so that they can take all of those ideas and they can figure out the words and the order that they want to put their words in, and they can attach the correct spelling to it. There's so much that goes into writing, so many brain processes that go into writing, that if we have kids that are struggling to form their letters accurately and automatically, all of that stalls out. And all of their brain power is now going into, how do I form this letter for this particular word, and they've completely forgotten the rest of their sentence. So, letter formation, handwriting, that is insanely important. So, if that's something that sort of fell by the wayside over the past few years, going into next year, you're going to want to make sure that you are including that in your lessons and that you're expecting that students do it correctly. Going along with that, you have to be able to provide time where you can give your students that immediate corrective feedback. Because as we all know, we have those students that create some pretty bad habits with their letters and their letter formation. And once that habit is formed, they can be broken, but it's really tricky. So in those earlier grades, when they're first learning to form their letters, make sure that you are available. If you have any additional staff that's available to you, pull them in so that they are keeping an eye on students as they're forming letters. And if they're doing it incorrectly, stop them right away. Stop them right away, model the right way, have them trace over what you just did, and then practice it on their own before moving on. So, great question. Clearly, clearly, I had a lot to say about that.
That was great. Awesome. Okay, I don't think we have any more questions, so we can move on to the next section.
Sure.
Mhm.
All right, so I had a lot of questions come in about what strategies to be teaching our students as they are learning to read. You can give a thumbs up, virtual thumbs up, or even just think in your mind, have you seen these Beanie Baby strategies before? They were so popular when I first started teaching 20 years ago. I remember going to Hallmark and spending $1 billion on these tie Beanie Babies because they were so important in teaching teaching my little kids how to read. But these strategies are outdated. They're really, really outdated. So these strategies really focused on the three cueing system that has been used in the past, and it's just not aligned to brain research. So one of the strategies that was included are the eagle eyes. So you're teaching your readers to look at the picture. If they get to an unknown word, look at the picture and see if they can figure out a word that would make sense there. And that's just not how the brain learns to read. It's essentially it's teaching kids to guess. Or you might teach your kids, if they get to a word they don't know, just skip it, go to the end of the sentence, and then go back and try and figure out a word that makes sense. So really use that context to figure out how to read, how to decode that unknown word. And that's just not how the brain learns to read. Our brain research shows us that we, again, are attending to all of the letters in print. That's what good readers do. And so that's the strategy that we have to teach our kids. We have to build that visual word form area so that it is so strong, our readers are able to pull words automatically off the page, again, so that they can comprehend. So any strategy that you're teaching your students to do is really to attend to the print. We want to teach them to decode using their phonics knowledge. So if they get to a word that they should be able to read because they've learned all of the spelling sound relationships, they've already learned those skills, then we need to encourage them to look at the letters and say the sounds that those letters make. Or if it's a vowel team, let's say, you can encourage them, oh, that EA says E in this word team, that EA is saying E, and then have them read through the word that way. So we really want to bring attention to the sounds. You want to make sure that you are giving lots and lots and lots of practice applying those skills in both in words, in phrases, and then moving into text. And this is again both for decoding and encoding, because the more we do that for both reading and spelling, the stronger that visual word form area is going to be. You want to make sure that you're focusing on accuracy before automaticity. So if we are only focusing on speed and we're putting a whole lot of emphasis on our kids becoming quicker readers before we're enforcing this accuracy, then we are going to be we're really going to be encouraging guessing, and we're going to be encouraging speed reading without accuracy. And so then they're just reading incorrectly. So if you are noticing that your students are reading disfluently, or they have a lot of errors in their reading, you want to go back to that word level first before giving them another passage and really break down the phonics skill that they're weak in, and give them some ample practice at the word level, then move to phrases, and then move to sentences and stories. And like I said earlier, you want to make sure that you're building both decoding and encoding simultaneously. All right. So again, before we move on to this next topic, which connects to the one that we just talked about, I want to make sure to answer any questions about strategies.
Anybody have any questions? Feel free to raise your hand, drop it in the Q&A or the webinar chat. I do have another question here.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see which one. Strategies. Should Are the two factors in the SVR equal?
Yeah, so the two factors of the simple view of reading. So the
Oh, okay.
question is, are the word recognition components and the language comprehension components equal? Are they equally important? Yes, they both need to be really strong in order for reading comprehension to occur. However, when it comes to the amount of time that you're spending teaching those components, that is going to differ based on the grade level that you're teaching. So if you're teaching in those earlier grades, those kindergarten and first grade grades, you're probably going to be spending about 50% of your time teaching those word recognition skills and 50% of your time teaching those language comprehension skills. As you move into second and third grade, that's going to shift a little bit more, because it's assumed that for your typical reader, they're already building those word recognition skills. Of course, you're going to continue the phonics scope and sequence and teach more of those advanced spelling patterns, and then you start to get into Greek and Latin roots. So you're still working on the word recognition skills. However, you're moving more into those language comprehension skills and eventually the reading comprehension skills. So are they both important and equally important? Absolutely. But as far as the amount of time spent teaching, it all depends on the grade level that you're teaching and the student that's in front of you. So I mentioned that in K1, it's a 50-50 split. If you've got a student who is in second grade or beyond, even, middle and high school, if they are struggling with decoding, then you're going to bring them back down to that K1 timeframe. So 50% word recognition, 50% language comprehension, because, those struggling readers can come, or I should say those early readers can come in all size bodies.
Um, okay, we also have another question. It says great strategies, but do you have them in Spanish?
Hmm. Do you mean like, would you follow the same strategies for a Spanish speaking or a Spanish speaking student or Spanish speaking reader? Is that, I just want to clarify that.
If you can clarify that, that would be great. I will say we will be sending out this presentation. Yes, she said that.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, so the Spanish spelling system it's similar to the English system in that it is based on sound and meaning as well. And so you would follow the same kinds of strategies for Spanish readers as well. Yep. Now, if you have a Spanish speaking student that you're teaching to read English, just like any of our ENL students, our English as new language learners, you're going to definitely put a lot more emphasis on building vocabulary and teaching what words mean. However, you're still going to be teaching those phonics skills to get the words off the page as well. All right, I'm going to move on to high frequency words, but keep those questions coming and we'll keep pausing along the way. So Jocelyn, just stop me if you need to. This question comes up a lot. What is the best way to teach high frequency words? And what's been so interesting is I've actually gotten this question quite a bit from parents during parent teacher conferences, or if we're having instructional support meetings. Parents in the past are really used to their students coming home with flashcards with what we used to call sight words to practice with their kids. And that was really comfortable for parents because it's something that they knew how to do. They could hold up a card for their student or their child. They could either read it or they couldn't. They'd put it back in the pile and so on. So that was something that felt really manageable. Well, now we're really moving away from that flashcard approach because, again, that just does not align with the brain research that tells us that readers do not memorize words as wholes. They read through and perceive every single letter in the words and attach them to sounds. They just do it as if by sight. So we are making a shift. We are making our shift in our understanding of what a sight word is. Now, the term sight word does not just refer to those irregularly spelled high frequency words. The term sight word is really referring to any word that you can read as if by sight. But if we're thinking about those high frequency words, there's a number of things to keep in mind. You can see here, we've got that picture crossed off that we're no longer taking a high frequency word or an irregularly spelled high frequency word and just putting, a shape around it and hoping that our kids are reading them, by sight. Or I should say by memorizing the picture of it. Now we're really bringing attention to the letters and the sounds that are within the words. Because actually, in fact, there are only 4% of English words are completely irregularly spelled. So that means that 96% of English words have pretty regular spelling patterns. Lots of them have just like one or maybe two parts of them that are considered a little bit irregular. And many of those irregular parts are only temporarily irregular. So they might seem irregular to a kindergartner or a first grader, like in the word they that has not learned that EY can say a. So that's going to be irregular to them. However, when they get into second and third grade, when they start to learn that EY together actually can say a, and it does in a number of words, then it's no longer irregular to them. So as we're thinking about high frequency words, we want to be teaching just two or three at a time. We don't want to overload our readers. You want to make sure that you're using phoneme grapheme mapping to bring attention to the sounds, and I'll model that in just a second. You want to guide your students to notice those expected parts first and then bring attention to the unexpected parts, because it's really just those unexpected parts that need to be memorized, that need to be learned as by heart. So I do want to, I'm going to stop sharing for just a second. Okay. Jocelyn, can you see me okay? All right, and I want to
Yes.
model for you how you would use or the best practices for teaching a new sight word. So if I were teaching my readers the word said, for example, again, keeping the brain in mind and the fact that we want to bring attention to those individual sounds and words, I'm going to have my readers tell me all of the sounds that they hear in the word said. So first I would say, okay, echo my word said. They would say said, and then I would say, okay, tap those sounds, and they would go said. And I would say, okay, there are three sounds in said. So I'm going to have my readers say said, and then they're going to tap as I'm writing the lines. And then I'm going to say to them, okay, what's that first sound in said? And they're going to tell me s. And I'm going to say, well, what letter usually says s? And they'll say S. And so I'm going to write it there and tell them in the word said, S says. Okay. And then I'm going to say, okay, what's the next sound in said? They're going to tell me and then I'm going to go to that other expected part. So what's that final sound? And they'll say d, and I'll say, what letter says d? And they'll say D, and I'll say, yep. And in the word said, D says d. So we've got d. This middle sound. What's that middle sound in said? And they're going to tell me and I'm going to say, well, it usually says and they'll tell me E, and I'll say, yeah, but in the word said, that is spelled with AI, and that's the part that we need to know by heart. So sometimes we'll just draw a little heart above it. If you have cute little heart stickers, you can hand those out. But the whole purpose of this is that phoneme grapheme mapping. So we are mapping out the sounds in the word, and then we're adding those graphemes, those letters that make those sounds, and we're bringing attention to both those expected sounds, those expected spellings, and the unexpected sound spelling. And that is that's what's going to align with that brain research, and that's what's going to help those words really stick in that visual word form area. I'm sure you guys have all had students in the past that have memorized those high frequency words incorrectly. So, like the word of, every time they see it, they might read for, because they've learned of and for are both high frequency words, or what we used to call those sight words. They both have an F and an O, and because they're not taught to read the sounds in the order that they come up, they've really just stored it incorrectly, and it's become a guess. Okay.
Okay. Does anybody have any questions? Does anybody want Emily to model
Now that
anything?
my background's good, I can
Yeah.
model it for you.
Now that she's not blurred anymore.
Mhm.
Okay. Anybody? No?
Okay, let's keep
Okay.
moving.
Go ahead.
All right, here we go. Maybe. All right. So another question that comes up is, what about guided reading? Guided reading is certainly a practice that we have followed as teachers for years and years and years. When I first started teaching 20 years ago, that was the only approach really that we were allowed to use, was guided reading. These are the steps in the guided reading process, and I want you to notice where word work comes into play. And this was taken right from Fontes and Pinnell's website. So when you are teaching a guided reading lesson, you're going to gather information about your readers to identify what you're emphasizing, and that's done through those running records. If you'll remember, with your running records, you're trying to analyze the errors. So you would try to figure out why the student was making the decoding error, why they were reading a word incorrectly, and you're trying to think to yourself, did they make a meaning error? Did they make a syntax error? Did they choose a word that would make sense there, but but isn't the word that's in front of there, or was it a visual error? Well, we know from brain research that we need to be reading all of the letters in a word. We need to be decoding and getting those words off the page. So if they weren't reading it correctly, it's because they weren't decoding it accurately. From there, after we collected that information, we would select and analyze texts to use. This was always really tricky for me because I might have kids that are all on the same level, letter level, but they are on that level for a number of different reasons. Some because they were struggling with decoding, some because they couldn't comprehend, some because their fluency just wasn't where it should be, but they were all level K, let's say. So we put them all together. So then finding a text to meet the needs, a similar text to meet the needs of all of the readers was really, really tricky. And then we'd introduce the text. And if it was a lower level text, we would have kids take a picture walk and talk about what's happening in the book. And then we would bring attention to the words. We'd want to make sure to observe the children while they're reading it individually, and of course, give them that feedback, discuss the meaning of the text. And then from there, we'd come up with a couple more teaching points. Okay. And then we would engage the children in letter or word work activities. So this is where that phonics work came in, and it's so much further down in the lesson and really became more by the way. Hey, we're reading this book that happens to have a word or two that has CH in it, and you're struggling with that. So let me teach you about the digraph CH. And that is just not that systematic, sequential, cumulative instruction that we know works for our readers now. And then we would have our students optionally extend their understanding through writing. And then, of course, we would reflect and plan again. Now, here's the thing that worked for a number of our kids, right? Like, I had a lot of kids that became really strong readers using that approach. And so when I started learning more about the science of reading at first, I'm like, well, why would I change something that change my practices that work for so many of our students? But the other issue is it didn't work for a number of our students, or it created these holes that needed to be filled. So perfect example are my three children. I've got one in elementary school, one in middle, and one in high school. My middle schooler and high schooler, they did not receive explicit phonics instruction in a sequential way because it wasn't done in their school at that time. They are still really great readers, but their spelling isn't necessarily that strong, or isn't as strong as it should be with them being great readers. My daughter, on the other hand, her school implemented a systematic phonics program right the year before she started. She's also a strong reader, but she's also a really strong speller. And that shows to me that I've got, three kids that went through the same system. They've got the same background. I understand all kids are different. However, that systematic instruction really helped her where the boys just didn't quite have that. So the question then comes to, okay, I've been doing guided reading groups for so long, but what does my small group instruction look like now? So with your earlier readers, it's going to look a little bit different. You're not necessarily going to have kids around the table that all have a book in front of them. Okay. You might be working on some phonemic awareness work using scaffolds. So if you have noted that your readers have a breakdown in their phonemic awareness skills, and you need to help them to perceive those individual sounds and words, then you might have a 10-minute group of some kids in front of you with discs or cubes where they are manipulating words, not printed words in front of them, but just through oral language and using scaffolds to help them begin to perceive those individual speech sounds within words. So that's going to look a little bit different than it has in the past. You also might have some readers in front of you that are working on, again, that decoding instruction and some fluency drills. So they might not have a book in front of them. They might be doing some fluency drills where they're reading words that have similar patterns to them and trying to do that in a timed and automatic way to build that automaticity. You could be working, it might be reading time, but you're doing some encoding practice through dictation, which is great and quite aligned with our brain research because, again, we need to be building those decoding and encoding skills simultaneously to build that visual word form area. It might be a group of students where they're practicing applying those skills in decodable text. So they would have books in front of them. You might have kids that are strong decoders, but they're struggling with comprehension. So you're going back to that sentence level comprehension and working on just understanding the meaning of what a sentence is telling them. So there's a lot of different things that you can be doing with your small group. You might be building some vocabulary and working on some syntax instruction for those students who have those weaker language comprehension skills, or if you have students who are new to the English language. So our small group instruction doesn't look like it used to, where everybody is sitting in front of you reading from the same book. It can look a little bit different. When you're creating those groups, again, you're going to want to go back to assessment, but I like to keep your Aries phases in mind. So when I am selecting, or when I'm grouping students, I'm going to think about what students do I have that are in that pre-alphabetic phase where they're not even um, they don't even know their letters and sounds just yet. They might know that letters uh, make words. They might have an awareness of that, but they don't really know the skills that go along with it, or those phonics skills yet. That would be a group. I might have some readers that know some of their letters and sounds, that partial alphabetic phase, that could be a group. Those kids that are really starting to learn lots of different patterns and words, that could be that full alphabetic group. And then those students who are in the consolidated alphabetic phase, that later alphabetic phase, they have enough word knowledge where you could have you could have a group that is very similar to a guided reading group of the past, where they are working on reading and comprehending. Maybe they're in a book club. Once you have students in the later part of that full alphabetic phase and into the consolidated alphabetic phase, go ahead and pull out those old leveled books, if they're decent quality, and use those with your readers. So with that being said, we don't ever want to give out that message that you're throwing away all those leveled books that you've collected throughout the years. There's a purpose for every text that you have. You just always want to keep the purpose of your lesson and the reader that's in front of you in mind when you're selecting your texts. So if you have a student, again, that is new to the language and you want to teach them some vocabulary words, or just get them to sort of enjoy hearing the same kinds of sentences over and over again, predictable text is great for that. Those content area books certainly are awesome for building content knowledge, some background knowledge, vocabulary. The authentic text is great for that rigorous vocabulary and purely for enjoyment as well. And then, of course, that content specific text. So, there's definitely a purpose for all of these texts. But we aren't necessarily going to place these in front of our readers to decode on their own unless they have enough skill to be able to do that. These are texts that we would want to highly support our students in reading, and probably include in more of a read aloud setting unless they are at that consolidated phase. Are there any questions about guided reading and small groups before we move on to comprehension? All right, I'm just going to keep moving here. Stop me, Jocelyn, if anybody chimes in here.
Nope, no questions yet.
Okay. All right. So we had some questions about comprehension, like, how do I do it? How do I teach comprehension? I've got the phonics thing down, but what about comprehension? Now, comprehension, there are so many different definitions for comprehension, but this is one that really stands out to me. So I wanted to make sure to pull it out. You can see here, comprehension is the process of simultaneously extracting and constructing meaning through interaction and involvement with written language. I really liked that it focused on the fact that comprehension is an active process and not a product. Oftentimes, we are asking students to create a product that shows their comprehension, but the act of comprehension is really this active process, all of those language skills going on in our brain, coupled with decoding and getting the words off the page. So there's a lot that goes into comprehension, and it certainly can be it can be tricky to teach. But what do we do when we have a reader that can decode but they can't comprehend? You want to make sure that you are always, and this is for all of your readers, all of your students, you want to make sure that you have a language rich environment. And you're providing that language rich environment through read alouds and shared text to build background knowledge and vocabulary. If you have a student that can decode a text, but they aren't comprehending it, they might not have background knowledge in the topic of that text. They might not have any way to connect to it or make meaning from it. So you're going to want to make sure that before you provide them with that text, you're building their background knowledge about that topic, that you're helping them understand those key vocabulary words that they need to know in order to comprehend the text, that you're pre-teaching that. And so that when they encounter them within the text, they're able to understand them. So in the past, when we thought about background knowledge, a lot of times we would think about students' experiences outside of school. We would come in saying, oh, they just don't have a lot of background knowledge anymore. And that's true, that can certainly be true. But we as teachers can build the background knowledge not just through experiences, not just through field trips, but by providing really rich read alouds and discussion around topics. Your science and social studies content areas are so important to build the background knowledge that is necessary for comprehending a lot of the text that we read. Also, if you're teaching about a topic over a long period of time, so if you're teaching about the same kind of topics in kindergarten and first and second and third grade, and they're just getting progressively more complex, that's a great way to build the comprehension skills that kids are going to need because you're building that knowledge. All right. You want to be asking yourself the following questions. If you have a student who can decode, but they can't comprehend, are they struggling with the surface code, so the literal word and phrase meanings, or the text base, so the underlining meanings of the words that they're reading? If it is the literal word and phrase meaning, then you're just going to be very explicit and direct with your instruction, and really talk to them about what the words in the sentence mean and talk them through what the sentence as a whole means. If it's that text base or those underlining meanings of the words, that's where they might be struggling to infer. They might be struggling to understand why a character is feeling the way that they're feeling. There's a lot more work that goes into that. So you have to teach them to tune into certain cues within the text to help them understand. Again, I'm using this as an example, how a character is feeling. They might be analyzing the sentences to determine when it's using the word he, who is the he referring to? You want to ask yourself, is it due to a limited vocabulary? And again, if it is, you want to provide that explicit instruction in vocabulary. There are lots of lesson plan templates out there to explicitly teach vocabulary. You can use word webs. You certainly want to pull in visuals whenever you can to help support your students with their vocabulary words. But again, you want to, at the very core, you want to be providing that language rich environment. We just talked about this. Is it due to background knowledge of the topic? And if so, you want to make sure you're building that background knowledge before providing the text. Here's a big one. Is it due to passive thinking while reading? And this happens a lot with our kids who have struggled to decode along the way, but then it clicks for them. So those kids that take off with their decoding, like around second grade or really any grade, but they've struggled for a while and then they take off, they're not used to thinking while they're reading, because the decoding has been such a struggle for a while that now that they are able to decode, they kind of don't really know what to do with it. When that happens, just bring them back to that sentence level, and have them think about the meaning of the sentence before going on to the next sentence. And then you can gradually build up, okay, now that you know the meaning of this sentence and this sentence and this sentence, let's think about the paragraph as a whole. And as I just said, you want to go back to that word and sentence level comprehension. You want to make sure that you're explicitly teaching articles and pronouns. That can get really confusing for kids really quickly when they get into some of those larger passages. They sort of lose track of what each article or pronoun and who each article or pronoun is referring to. So you want to be really explicit with that instruction. And you can use a comprehension planning checklist. So you want to make sure that that your planning for comprehension work is as explicit as your planning is for phonics and decoding work as well. So in summary, when we are getting started with the science of reading and trying to figure out where do we begin, you want to become familiar with those major science of reading models. Make sure you're referring to them regularly. Go ahead and pull them out when you have a conversation with parents, when you have a conversation with other providers or other teachers, with your principal. When you're talking about students, pull out those models to talk about where the breakdowns are happening, where their strengths are, and why your lessons are structured in the way that they are. You want to make sure that you're focusing on accuracy and automaticity to build that visual word form area. The explicit phonics lesson plan template is a great template to use really with any phonics lesson. You want to make sure that you're forming small groups based on those screening and diagnostic assessment rather than the traditional guided reading groups of the past, where it was just based on the level of text that they fell within. You want to make sure you're following a heart word approach when teaching high frequency words, where you are teaching your students to attend to the expected parts, and really they only have to memorize that unexpected part. And remember, a lot of our irregularly spelled words are really only temporarily irregular. And then finally, you want to make sure that you're building that comprehension through explicit instruction. If there's anything you can get out of the science of reading research, it's that we have to be explicit with our instruction. It seems kind of common sense, but we really have to make sure that if we want students to learn it, we are being very explicit with it, whether it's with building background knowledge, vocabulary, syntax, and grammar, or those phonics skills. So thank you for joining us. We do have a couple of minutes before we're going to end our webinar. So if there are any questions that have popped up along the way, please feel free to ask them now.
I see a question just came in. Any suggestions for navigating teaching in a school that is still holding tight to the three queuing system, F and P, O of S, etc.?
Yeah. 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 I think the more that you can become familiar with those major models and bring them into your conversation, the better. So, you know, when you are planning for your small groups, even if you are within using a text that maybe isn't the best or most aligned with the science of reading, keep in mind what your students need. So become familiar with those diagnostic tools that are very readily available out there. Check their phonology, really attend to their phonics decoding skills, and bring attention to those letter patterns. See if you can work into your day a systematic and explicit phonics approach to teach your kids how to decode, um, even if you're trying to work within that balanced literacy framework. But the more that you can become familiar with the why, and can speak to that, the better, you can have those conversations with people that make the big decisions to hopefully into guide them into a more structured literacy approach.
All right. You just shared that a little too soon.
No, you're fine.
No, because there are some more questions that I have. Let's see. What are you guys seeing?
Jocelyn, if you want to put that screen up, because I'm sure some people if they have to leave,
Yeah,
if you want to put that screen up, you can still ask questions while it's up there.
yeah. So somebody had asked earlier about the decodables. This is the decodable series that Emily was talking about. It's from Norwood House Press, so you can scan this QR code or you can go to norwoodhousepress.com/decodables. And what you're seeing scrolling here is the page with all of the currently released sets. There's 6 different sets from basically preschool to through 2nd grade. And new books are coming out for 2nd through 4th grade in this fall. And so those will be coming out. Emily worked on those. She built the scope and sequence for them, and she worked on all the teachers' notes. They're really, really great. The modeling that you saw her doing there, that's in those teachers' notes too. So somebody had also asked if there was going to be any book recommendations for grades 3 through 5. It's not through 5, but 2 through 4, and then we'll
Yeah.
probably keep going. Honestly, and
Yeah.
those 2 sets are really they're kind of like companions, right? One of them's like a
Mhm.
nonfiction, and then there's a fiction that's kind of like a companion to it.
Yeah. Yeah. And those decodables, as Jocelyn was mentioning, the teacher notes actually have that explicit phonics lesson plan. Each of the books has an explicit phonics lesson plan that follows that template that goes right along with it.
Mhm.
I just saw a question that popped up in the chat regarding how do you teach middle and high schoolers uh, aligned with the science of reading. So if you're talking about teaching middle and high schoolers how to decode, if you've got struggling decoders, you are going to follow the same approach that you would use with a beginning reader, even though it's an older student. Of course, it is going to be much trickier to intervene at that age. However, it can be done. They may not be at the fluent, they might not be reading at the fluency levels that we would want them to be reading at. So speed wise, they might not be, it might continue to be slow reading rate, which is of course going to affect their comprehension because their brain power is going to that decoding, but you can still teach them to decode following this, again, that explicit phonics lesson plan, and the assessments, assessing their phonology, making sure that's intact as well. Um, but then as far as just teaching middle and high schoolers in general, you want to really be thinking about that language comprehension. And if you do have students that can decode and can, break the words into their sounds, um, and get the words off the page, you want to make sure that you're still building that background knowledge and the vocabulary, exposing them and teaching them about the more complicated language structures. You're also going to want to bring attention to Greek and Latin roots, because if you can really open up the window to Greek and Latin roots, that opens up so many more words that they will be able to comprehend at those upper grades.
That's great. We had so many great questions. So I definitely want to thank Emily for putting on this amazing webinar. We've gotten so many comments in here about, oh wait, somebody else just came in. I don't want to lose
I
out
love
on
that one. Is it about the
anything.
phonemic awareness in the dark? Is
Yes.
that the one that you just saw? Okay, I do want to
Yes.
talk about that real quick and then we got to go. I know we got to
Okay.
send you
Okay.
all on your way.
Yeah.
But yes, there has been some conflicting research that's coming out. So in the past, like in the near past, we used to say that phonemic awareness could be taught in the dark with your eyes closed. You're just having students attend to the sounds and words and not even attaching it to print. But there's some more recent research out there that's showing that if you actually layer in print with your phonemic awareness work, that you have some stronger results. So I think that's also important to note with the science of reading, that this is an evolving body of research. And what's been pretty cool though is a lot of the researchers that I've been reading, when they come up with when they learn new information, then some of the practices are tweaked a little bit. So they're not just sitting there like, nope, this is the one way that we do it. As we learn more about the research and as we start to layer in some of these practices together, there are, some theories that are evolving. So I will say that in my own practice, I have noticed that with my earliest readers, I tend to work with phonemic awareness, phonological and phonemic awareness without letters for a little while. But once I see that they are understanding the concept of it, the concept of breaking down a word into smaller parts, that's when I start to layer in those letters that they're familiar with, and I have seen some good results with that. So great question.
Yeah. I'm glad that we got in there the last minute. So I do want to thank, like I was saying, I want to thank Emily for putting on this great webinar. We got so many comments saying that this was great and really, really helpful. We will be sending out a link to our YouTube channel to watch this again. And if you when you go to our YouTube channel, you can also see other webinars that we've done together with Emily. There was a 3-part webinar that we did on the decodables and the science of reading. Part 1 was the science of reading and structured literacy. Part 2 was all text has a purpose, so why focus on decodables? And part 3 was applying an explicit phonics lesson plan. So it broadens the things she's talked about here. So if you liked what she had to say, you should definitely go check those out. Yeah, so I'll be sending a follow-up. There will be also someone else had asked about a certificate for this. We will send a certificate within our follow-up. So guys, just look out for that. And again, I want to thank Emily, but I also want to thank all of you because these questions were really amazing. And you guys are all wonderful, and teaching is hard, but it's so important, and everything you do is important. So we love
Mhm.
teachers, and thank you guys for showing up and sticking around with us. Um,
Yes, thank you. And any questions we didn't get to, I'm going to make note of them and we can
mhm.
definitely include them in future webinars and follow-ups. So thank you all so much. If you're not done with school, enjoy the rest of your year. If you are done with school, enjoy the summer. It is so well deserved. So thank you all so much. And thank you, Jocelyn, for
Thank
being an
you.
awesome moderator.
Oh, we're going to be at the Reading League conference too. I know this is like kind of a new thing, and this is the first time going, but Emily and I are going to be at the Reading League conference. So you can come over and see how fun we really are because we are,
Yes, we're a
just come
blast.
over, chat with us. We're so fun. It's going to be the best booth at the place. So, all right.
Yes, come say hi. Come say hi.
Hopefully we'll see you guys there. Have a good night.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks. Stop share and try to end this. Okay, bye.
Okay, bye.